The war in Ukraine is not just a regional conflict, it's a seismic event reshaping the global landscape, impacting everything from energy prices and supply chains to the future of democracy. Delta Analytics explores the far-reaching consequences of the war, examining its effects on geopolitics, economics, and our interconnected world. Join us as we delve into the conflict's ripple effects and analyze how it's shaping our world.
Hello, welcome to the first podcast of the Delta Report, Delta Analysis, with me, Igor Rubchinsky, and Lieutenant Colonel Kestutis Eidukonis, Kasey. We're going to be discussing situation in the world, politics, military situation, and specifically Ukraine. Kasey, welcome to the show. Before the show, we discussed that we wanted to talk about situation in Ukraine. So what is your analysis of the latest events? Where we're at?
Thank you, Igor, for having me on the show. I appreciate it. I'm a big supporter of Ukraine, as you know, and you're one too. So I think we got a lot in common, and we all want to see Ukraine succeed. Unfortunately, the Russian disinformation and propaganda that's going on around now, if I were to listen to that, I would believe that Ukraine has already lost the fight, and all they have to do is, arrange for surrender terms with Herr Putin. But knowing better and knowing what's going on, I got to point out that there's basically two ways of fighting a war. One is tactical, the other one is strategic. Now, tactically, the Ukrainians are losing a little bit, but they're holding their own. They're holding the line. They're exacting a very heavy price for every kilometer, every meter of Ukrainian land that the Russians conquer, and that's catching up to the Russians. The situation in Russia is deteriorating. The inflation rate is 27%. The bank interest rate right now that the central bank is charging has gone up to 21%, and they forecast having to go up to 23 or even 25% in the near future. So the economic situation is bad. Their imports are very expensive because the value of the ruble is plummeting every day because they're printing so many of them and deficit financing this war. The Ukrainians are also doing the right thing by bombing the refineries, using their drones to bomb the refineries and ammunition dumps, strategic military sites, factories that produce military goods, and so on. The Russians are putting on a brave front, but they can't replace a lot of this stuff. A lot of the stuff that's in their oil refineries, they had some spare parts laying around, but since the Western powers that be that used to run these places for them have withdrawn, they can't even get these parts. They have to fabricate them or something else. So anytime they knock out a refinery, it's diesel and aviation gas and gasoline that does not go to the front. And those tanks don't run too well on air.
Well, both of us worked in various capacities in our organization to support Ukraine. But to make this discussion lovely, let me take a position of a devil's advocate and challenge some of the things that maybe a preconception and ideas that some of our listeners may have, and the concepts on the ground. So, for instance, what is the reason do you think Russia started this war? What is the end goal, and what is the end game would look like from Russian and Ukrainian perspective of a victory? How would a victory look to Ukrainian? How a victory look to Russian? And why did this thing started from not even 2 years ago. It started maybe in 2014.
I agree with you that it did start in 2014. The Maidan revolution did not go over well with Herr Putin, and he decided that he needed to take care of this country. The country was weak at the time because it had just overthrown a government. The military was very weak because it had been totally neglected, disarmed, and put in a very bad shape. And the country was not ready for what Putin did. To improve his popularity, he staged that invasion of Crimea, and it went over well. So followed up with the invasion of the Donbass, which was an invasion. It's not separatists there, doing anything. And what most people are not aware of in the West was that, Russian language, no problem in Ukraine. I think most Ukrainians actually spoke more Russian than they spoke Ukrainian. And the two countries, as my knowledge of history, were very close for a while, because they're basically Ukrainians fought in World War II with the Russians and sacrificed per capita way more people than even the Russians did. So the whole thing with the language thing was a sham. The big thing that most people I don't think understand is that the Donbass is a huge reservoir of natural minerals: uranium, lithium, magnesium, manganese, oil, coal, and I think if Putin grabbed that, he'd have pretty much a monopoly on the fossil fuels in the world, actually, because Russia's the largest oil producer in the world. So
Well,
what?
Donbass is definitely very rich, and this is industrial basin of Ukraine.
Yeah.
By some estimates, between 17 and 1 trillion just in the minerals under the earth. But really, they didn't have to capture this territory and be responsible for the population, social security, all the other stuff that goes along with having a territory in order to control it. It would be very easy to control it through the oligarchs, through the figureheads. Nevertheless, they venture into the adventure of invading Donbass and Crimea. Why do you think that Putin decided to do that? You said in the point that was to boost his popularity, but he was already popular after, by all accounts, winning the war in Chechnya.
Yeah, he had some popularity because of that, but the popularity was starting to wane. And also, he needed to have something to give to his oligarchs to keep them happy because, they're, a billion here, a billion there, but pretty soon you want to have 3 billion instead of just 2 billion. So he had to have something else to redistribute to them. And the Donbass was a perfect territory. And not only that, but I think he basically resented the Ukrainian people for wanting freedom and independence. And they were a bad example for Russians and for Putin.
Well, that's true. But do you think that maybe it was he was creating a buffer zone between him and the West, like he created in Georgia, in Moldova, with Pridnestrovia, and at that time he was listening, or he was hearing that Ukraine might fall into the NATO sphere and NATO territory, and a NATO border with Russia would increase.
Well, this is very rational on his part, and I got to admire him on that because he figured it out that as long as there was a conflict like there is in Georgia, or there's a conflict like there is in Ukraine, these countries are not going to be allowed to join NATO. NATO is a defensive organization. NATO doesn't go after you. NATO doesn't go seeking you to join them. You go seeking to join NATO. Lithuania joined NATO in 2008. I was part of that process and helped them get in and collected signatures and all kinds of other stuff. It's a defense against Russia. Who are they defending themselves against? There's no one else to defend themselves against. China's too far away. Russia's the only country that's a threat to world peace out there right now in Europe. So yeah, the countries that joined, neutral Finland, neutral Sweden, hundreds of years of neutrality, and all of a sudden, as soon as Putin invades Ukraine, what do? They run for the NATO embrace. So NATO, Putin is the best salesman for NATO that there ever was.
Very true. Under Putin, he increased his border with Ukraine, with NATO, instead of decreasing it via these countries joining.
Absolutely.
And it's his border, assuming that Belarus is his protectorate or ally. So
yeah.
And
unfortunately, the population in the Donbass that was kind of pro-Russian, they're all gone. They have been
in one way or the other,
sent to the front and eliminated. And it's basically Russians moving in there right now and taking over the country, and that's part of the Russian imperialist dream. Putin does not want to reconstitute the Soviet Union. Putin wants to reconstitute Russia, Imperial Russia, Tsarist Russia, and be the new czar. I mean, just look at the ceremonies around him and the Imperial Guard that guards the palace. I mean, that's a throwback to the czar's times.
That's very true, and in fact, you're right. The idealists in Donbass and Prидnestrovia were the first ones to be utilized.
Mobilized and utilized, yes.
Mobilized and utilized.
And eliminated.
Right. So, which is extremely high price to pay for these areas, for their perceived new status, whatever status it is. But there is also conversations that Russia's attempt, Russian reasoning in the war was not only standing against NATO, but creating a multipolar reality in the current geopolitical landscape. Because in the past, United States in the West dominated geopolitics. Now we have BRICS that we have to contend with. And just last week, there was heads of many leading economic nations meeting for the BRICS summit. So, and in fact, in this term, what you mentioned, in this sense, what you mentioned, China and India and others are now see that they have a stake in the game, and they would be at the table as equals with the West and the United States because of this war, because of this conflict. And that's why China is throwing their weight behind Russia to fuel the hostilities. And not least important is Taiwan, that is leading exporter of microchips, that technology that basically foundation for latest military and civilian products that is being threatened by China to be cut off, or the supply would be cut off from Europe and the United States by what they demonstrated as a blockade of the Taiwan. So it seems like from that perspective, these players are natural allies based on their axis of interests.
I tend to disagree a little bit there. I think
the
Chinese are rubbing their hands in glee because Russia is being diminished. New maps that have come out from the Chinese side, which has pissed off Putin, shows parts of Russia belonging to China, the parts that Russia took from China in earlier times. Now, this multi-polarity thing is, it's a joke, because the United States, I don't think for the last 100 years has pushed any country we've conquered, Iraq or any place else, right after it's done, we've gotten out of there. There's a difference between the Russians, over the last 150 years or 200 years, wherever they stepped foot, they try to stay there. And that's in the, World War II, they took part of Japan, and they're not giving that back. They took Kaliningrad, which is part of East Prussia. They're not giving that back. The United States has troops stationed in some of these countries, but that's because of the Soviet threat and the Chinese threat. And that is at the request of those governments. Now, the East Germans that were displaced from Kaliningrad, or the Germans that were displaced from there, they're not getting their land back. They're not getting their territory back, even if they wanted to. So, the reality of the world is, the multipolarity, I think, exists. I mean, the United States is strong, but it's not the one and only, because there are other countries that compete with them. China successfully competed with manufacturing and everything else. India is doing the same. And, we can compete economically, and that's what we should do. There's not a problem with that. But the problem is that the Russians can't compete economically. The only thing they have is gas and oil and, lots of cannon fodder. So that's their foreign policy.
Well, that's it is true, but what we saw with China, there was an export of the manufacturing production facilities from the United States to China. That could have happened in Russia as well back in the 90s with Yeltsin. And at some point it started, but it was not complete for whatever reason. Not sure. Actually, I truly don't know. Have a theory why all of the manufacturing jobs, or not all, a lot of them went to China instead of Russia. But nevertheless, they did. And while I remember I was part of this history, and a lot of economists, including myself, believe that Adam Smith would work, and we would have a cheaper manufacturing in such countries like Mexico, China, and so forth. And at the end, all would benefit because their standard of living will come up, and so is ours due to the production of cheaper manufacturing goods. Nevertheless, but what really happened is that now that China captures some of the strategically important resources to the West, and right now West is concerned about what we're going to do about such thing as the raw steel and raw aluminum and other cheap products that and the technology that we export to China. But before we go,
and how do you manufacture batteries without lithium? Yeah,
right. And how do you bring it back? And what's really important. But really, do you have any thoughts on why the manufacturing and technology went to China instead of Russia?
Because the Chinese were fighting for it. The Chinese economic policies at that time, they did let capitalism flow. They encouraged entrepreneurship and so on. In Russia, basically, you had because China really had nothing, no industry really to speak of. In Russia, you had Soviet industries left over, steel manufacturing, mining. I know I was involved with the metals trade from Norilsk in Russia, with going through Lithuania and being sold to Sweden and other countries there. So I could see where these people took over these companies, and basically it was highway robbery of what was there. The companies would be bought for nothing, financed by the Russian government. Their debts would be thrown out, where the Aeroflot got taken over by one gentleman who's no longer with us, but he took over all the financial assets of the company all overseas. So all the hard currency was his. The debts were thrown out the window, and to buy the company, he even borrowed money from the Russian bank to do it, and then never paid it back. So it's kind of the robber barons really took over the Russia, and that's what happened. I think a lot of that was changing back in the early 90s. they went through some real hard times. I remember when I was in Russia, 5,000 rubles to the dollar. Can you imagine that?
Hmm.
5,000 rubles
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
dollar.
I remember the
Yeah, yeah,
hyperinflation when
yeah.
the
And
change
little
ruble
old ladies
was.
were literally jumping out the window because they'd saved all their
Yep.
lives for their funeral. And 2,000 rubles is what they saved. When your average pay was 200 rubles a month or so, and you couldn't even buy a bottle of Stoli with that. It
Right,
cost
right.
5,000 rubles to buy a bottle of Stolichnaya, and if you wanted something better like Absolute, it was 15,000 rubles. Imagine that. So that
It
they,
was damn near as bad as Weimar
yeah.
Republic.
And then when
Yeah.
Putin got in, he got the benefit from all those economic reforms.
Hmm.
And I think it's a very interesting story. I was told that basically the Chechen War started because there were two mafias in existence. There was the Moscow Mafia and the Chechen Mafia.
Hmm.
And the Chechen Mafia was moving in on the Moscow Mafia's territory. So they got warned to get out, and they said, "Yeah, who's going to make us? You and whose army?" And the Muscovites said, "Oh, well, we do have an army." So that's
Well,
the start of
well,
it.
in fact, when you were talking about the privatization of the factories, it was everybody was talking about at that time that mafia in Kreml pretty much bought out and distributed the goods to their partners who are now oligarchs, but it was all run by the mob. And in fact,
Yeah,
well, I'm not sure about the fact, but the story goes that Putin was part of the one of the outfits and got into power.
yep.
But uh, for the for this today's discussion, I did earlier post a question for you. What do you think that end game would look like for Putin and Ukraine?
My analysis, my professional military analysis, and my professional, as an economist, Russia is going to collapse. It's the economics in Russia are really, really, really slippery right now, and they're getting bad and worse. Worst case, it's just a matter of not if, it's a question of when it's going to get really bad. And I think the oligarchs themselves are looking at Putin and saying, "Okay, you're a loser. You promised this whole damn thing would be over in 3 days, 4 days, a month, 3 months. Okay, now it's been almost 3 years, and what have you gotten us? 700,000 casualties. All the Soviet stocks of equipment that we used to have for war, they're all gone. The Russian army's become a joke. You're pushing them into a meat grinder and killing off the demographics of Russia. The provinces in Russia are starting to, you have the Chechens fighting with their neighbors already, and this is going to get out of control, and there's going to be a
Hmm.
civil war in Russia. So I think that what they were afraid of disintegrating the Russian Federation, I think is going to happen anyway. It's just a question of time, and the best hope that Putin's got is whoever, that he thinks that if Trump gets in, he's going to basically give him what he wants, give him the Donbass, give him Crimea, let him keep that, and force the Ukrainians into a peace treaty. That would be victory for Russia. They can't take over the entire Ukraine. They can't occupy it. They don't have the military strength. They don't have the economic strength to do that. They don't have the manpower to do that. The Ukrainians are not going to really win on the tactical battlefield, but what they're doing strategically is absolutely brilliant. Bombing the refineries, bombing the ammunition manufacturing facilities, bombing the electronics factories, bombing anything that can produce anything for the war uh, is brilliant. And not only that, but the fact that the Russian infrastructure is falling apart because the men are off fighting the war. There's nobody to maintain the roads. There's nobody to maintain the sewer systems. There's nobody to maintain the heating systems, nobody to maintain the electrical systems. The country's falling apart. Now, the question is, will they fall apart before the West ceases to support Ukraine? And
Well,
victory for Ukraine will be, I think, when the Soviet Union, when Russia falls apart, When Russia falls apart, I think they'll get their country back, their territories back, and the reparation from the funds that have been seized by the Western governments.
Well, it is easier to, as you pointed out, to kind of formulate what would be a victory for Ukraine. It's definitely territory. It's the reuniting the territories that were captured by Russians, and receiving reparations for their losses and pain and suffering that was needlessly inflicted on them by their neighbor. But if we get back to Russia, Russia really, yes, there are provinces and territories, but mainly it's two cities, St. Petersburg and Moscow.
In Moscow, yes.
And there is a train of thought that as long as there is no hurt felt by the populace in those two cities, they are good to go. Everybody else can, go in flames. There is a caveat that you mentioned that, yes, territories, especially Vladivostok, is extremely important for Russia and their to retain their territorial unity and integrity. And we did see in the past demonstrations and protests in those areas. But don't you think that part of the mafia that was put in place there by the Kremlin would stay in line as long as they are getting paid?
You would think so, but I think their pay has been cut. The access to the things that they used to enjoy, like Italian vacations, French vacations, Caribbean vacations, unless you want to go to Cuba, you're kind of limited in that, or Venezuela. Venezuela is a beautiful country. I know my better half is from there, grew up there, and beautiful beaches and everything else, but the country is totally mismanaged and totally screwed up through socialism and communism and corruption. I don't know what it is, but communism seems to always be followed by corruption. There was a brilliant man who was the vice president of Yugoslavia one time by the name of Milo Angelas, wrote a book called The New Class while he was in jail for criticizing Tito. He was the vice president of Yugoslavia at the time too, but he basically said what communism did. They got rid of one aristocratic class and replaced it with another one, and that's basically it. I saw it myself.
It's even worse. It's even worse. It's not the aristocracy used to be kept in check by the laws and the vertical power and.
Right.
Whoever is the Rex in power. Now with the socialism, you have absolute power that runs in check. And I don't know who said it, but absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's an adage, and the corruption in Russia is amazing. I mean, everybody there steals, and that's kind of also a legacy of communism, because when I talk to people from Lithuania, they the government is us and everything belongs to the government, so I'm not really stealing, I'm just taking what belongs to me in the first place. So they used to walk out the factories with all kinds of stuff, the butcher shops, the people that got the meat first got the meat first, and then you traded on a barter system. If you wanted the doctor to be nice to you, you gave him a nice piece of steak for a good price and saved it for him under the table and all that other stuff. So the corruption there was widespread, and it's still there. I'm amazed by how that system is persistent.
Kasey,
I think in Ukraine, and it still has traces in Lithuania too.
I think you just picked up a next topic for us to discuss, but for this session, we're almost running out of time. And to finish it up, what do you think, or maybe we should have it in another discussion. You said that Russia running out of resources, but Ukraine is also running out of resources.
Yeah, it's a paradox, but Ukraine got late to the game to mobilization. They needed to mobilize earlier. And the West, we've definitely screwed up. I mean, I hate to say it, but the United States government is giving Ukraine enough to fight, to exist, to survive, but not enough to win. Had they done that right from the beginning, and they were, the military experts were all, oh, Ukraine's going to fall in a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And as soon as it didn't fall, they should have started shoving the tanks down there. They should have started shoving the planes down there. They should have started training the pilots. Everything comes late. Now, that's, one of the byproducts of being a democracy. Everybody's got to be on board and everybody's got to be together. But too much democracy in wartime is a little dangerous. In wartime, you got to concentrate, put your fate in a leader's hands and let them do the thing that needs to be done. We didn't do that. The mobilization part has to take place in Ukraine's part, and they're having problems with that too. I know that. There are people, that were paying off inspectors and the military authorities not to get drafted, getting all kinds of phony bull stuff. That doesn't go over well with anybody. And I think, the Ukrainian people have been marvelous in this thing, but there are elements that are resisting the draft and fighting against it and all that other stuff. But yeah, the mobilization needs to take place. But then in addition to the mobilization, the West has to provide the arms for these people. You can't just mobilize, an army and not give them weapons and not give them uniforms and all kinds of other stuff. So it's got to be done. It's got to be done from our part, and it's got to be done quickly. We can't wait. We can't put this off. Every day that this war continues costs lives of Ukrainians, but also Russians. I mean, those are people too that, much as we hate to say bad things about them, they're sons and daughters and mothers and fathers that are not coming back from the war, and it's needless. It's needless suffering imposed on both countries. You got to win this war quickly, and the sooner the United States gets their act together and sends them the weapons they need to win, not just to hold. This win is it's a cruel strategy. The letting them just hold on. You're costing needless lives. I'm very passionate about that because I read about it every day. I look at it. I understand what is going. I've gone through 2 wars myself, and I know what it's like to lose people and to lose people and people that are friends of yours. And I lost the whole platoon in Germany. 33 guys of mine died in a helicopter crash. So it's not easy.
Right. And for those who don't know, our friends continue dying, even in this war right now in Ukraine, because we know people who we support. But Kasey, we got to wrap up. But
Perfect.
I think you come up with several topics for the next program. Now they're all important. We got to figure out what to pick up next.
Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you for joining.
I think our audience could probably make some good suggestions too out there in YouTube land, right?
A good point. Actually, for the second one, I'm not sure if we're gonna have opportunity to give them a chance. We might have a couple broadcasts recorded before we start posting them. But I wanted to thank you for joining me and to have this lively discussion. Time just flew by. We were planning to do 15 minutes. I think we cut a little bit more than that. Yeah. And I'm looking forward for you to joining me to continue this discussion soon.
Perfect. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for all you're doing for Ukraine too. Appreciate it.
And thank you. Thank you.
All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
This week, we're shining a spotlight on Blue Yellow USA, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to providing non-lethal aid to the defenders of Ukraine. They're working tirelessly to deliver essential supplies like medical kits, protective gear, and vital technology directly to the front lines. Every contribution, big or small, makes a real difference in helping those bravely defending Ukraine. Please consider donating to Blue Yellow USA if you can. Your support will help ensure that Ukraine has the resources needed to continue the fight for freedom and democracy. That's all the time we have for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining us as we explored thought-provoking topics. We hope you found it insightful and informative. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to catch future episodes where we delve into more exciting topics. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.